This is a Fender Player Telecaster, and this is a Squier Affinity Telecaster. We're going to listen to how different they sound. From playing these two guitars back to back right now, this Fender Player Telecaster, the neck pickup, definitely sounds better than this Squier Affinity. I believe these might be Alnico 5s. I can't actually remember. I bought it about a year ago, so it's a 2020 Fender Player Telecaster. This is a brand new Squier Affinity Telecaster, and these are ceramic pickups. And the neck pickup doesn't sound as good. I will tell you the outputs in a minute. With the bridge, I don't think it's as different. I think they both sound good. And again, Alnico, ceramic, so there isn't that much difference. There is a bit of a price difference though. These are $550, so the Fender Players are about $550, and this Affinity was $179, so they're about 180 quid, which is £370 difference. So if the differences were purely pickup sounds, you could definitely spend under £370 on pickup to make this sound as good, if not the same as this, and probably have quite a lot of money to spare. I know there are other differences, and we'll go into that, and here are some of those differences. The first of those differences, the Fender Player Telecaster has a nice round normal Telecaster jack socket. I really like these, I think they're really good. The Affinity doesn't, it has one of these surface mount ones. Not really a fan of these, if I'm being completely honest. Both guitars come with a 3-ply scratch plate. I think that's a nice touch. I don't really like single-ply scratch plates. Occasionally like them on the more vintage Telecasters, like if you had a knotty pine, almost unfinished type Telecaster, I think you can get away with it on that. But a 3-ply scratch plate really makes a difference. They both come with the flatter style of bridges, which are more of a bent plate with 6 individual saddles, not the 3 saddles you see on some Telecasters. I far prefer these type of bridges and saddles over the 3 T sort of shaped ones. These are a lot easier to intonate, and everything's easier on these. One obscure difference which my friend pointed out, so we did a video, a blindfold comparison between these two guitars, and sound wise he thought this sounded more expensive and this felt more expensive, so check out that video. I'll put a link in the description and a box at the end so you can have a look. But the knob diameter on the Fender Player is about 1 millimeter thicker than on the Affinity. I don't really have any more to say on that, to be honest. Neck wise, this doesn't have a skunk stripe. This one does. I like the skunk stripe. I wish it was on here. I did actually order a Laurel fretboard, so it would have been more like this. This is Pherotone, I think that's how you say it, which I think looks really nice. And this one's maple. Wasn't supposed to have maple, but the one I ordered wasn't in stock, so they sent this. Whatever. Both have C-shaped neck calves, apparently. Now, what I noticed when I played this before passing it to my mate to try was that the Fender Player felt thinner and the Affinity felt thicker. And he said the same thing. And prior to doing the blindfold test with him, I actually measured the width and depth of both necks in a couple of places. They're identical. And about 2 minutes ago, I've knocked it since, I used one of this crude method of measuring the neck. And although they're both supposed to be C-shaped calves, this one's actually a bit fatter on the outside, so the other one, the Fender, tapers in a bit more. This is massively subjective, so I don't think you shouldn't buy a guitar based on a slight difference in neck calf, but I do prefer the Fender. It feels nicer in that respect. Also, the Fender's machine heads are nicer. They are proper Fender machine heads. These Squier ones, normally Squier ones aren't too bad, but these ones just, I haven't got on with these. It's got a black headstock. I spray painted this and put a Fender decal on it just to make it harder for my mate to distinguish. It didn't come out very well, so we're not going to go into that too much. Weight-wise, I don't know what the bodies are made of, and I don't care. They weigh about the same. If anything, the Fender is slightly heavier than the Affinity. Playability-wise, the Fender, I did have to do a little bit of work to give it a bit of a setup, which I was surprised about. The Affinity, I had to give a lot more of a setup. The intonation was miles off on this. Well, on the thick E string it was. And I play a lot of chords which have open notes, so intonation is very important to me. The action was also all over the place. I haven't had to adjust the truss rod, so there were no major problems, but it's something to be aware of. I don't know how much a setup is. I think it's about 60 quid, but you probably will have to pay for a setup on Affinity. A lot of Squiers come with scratchy frets, and I found with the Bullets, they're really scratchy to the point where you need to do something about it. This one wasn't too bad, so I did give it a bit of a sanding just because it came with 9s and I've put 10s on it, so a thicker gauge string just because that's my personal preference, and gave it a little wipe over, but it didn't really need it, so I wouldn't worry about having to do that. If you're going to restring it, I would probably get some fret rubbers. I've got a video on that and they cost about a tenner. It takes 10 seconds and it just feels nicer, but you don't need to do it because if you play it enough, if you play it for about a week, it'll wear off. In fact, you play it for a couple of hours, it'll wear off. There's no sharp frets on either of these. I say there's no sharp frets. There aren't sharp frets, but they're not as smooth on either of these. So on the Fender Player Telecaster or the Squier Affinity, they're not as not sharp as I'd like them to be. I would say blunt, but that doesn't really make sense. So if I were doing these, I would have filed them a bit more, but there's nothing sharp. You're not going to get hurt. It doesn't feel bad. There's no rolling on either of these I can feel, but this neck definitely feels nicer. They're both satin finishes, but the Fender finish is slightly nicer. Just for those who want to know, this one's made in Mexico. This one's made in China. I was a bit surprised. I thought the Affinities were made in Indonesia, and I thought the Bullets were made in China. It's the other way around. The Affinities are made in China. Bullets are made in Indonesia. Another pointless fact. Both have string through bodies. There's a bit of a mark here on this one because when I took the strings out to change them, one of these metal ferrules, I don't know how to say it, one of these ferrules fell out. I don't know how to say that word. So I glued it back in, put a bit of glue, hit the guitar body, and in a panic I wiped it off and I've got a bit of glue on the back of the guitar, but don't really care. If you're thinking of buying one of these or one of these, my advice would be, if you don't want to do anything to it, ever, get the Fender. If you're planning on modding it, get an Affinity, because if it goes wrong, who cares? And you can spend a lot of money on modding before you've spent the 550 equivalent that a player costs. To the point where I bought this to mod. I'm going to turn it into an Esquire with a Seymour Duncan £1/4 pound in the bridge. I'm going to cut an arm contour, belly cut. What else am I going to do? Change all the electrics. I've resprayed the headstock. I'm going to do tons of stuff to this just because I want to try a single pickup guitar. And I'm glad I bought this and not a Bullet, because I've previously owned a Bullet and a Bullet Strat. I haven't really been impressed by any Bullet guitars, but the Affinities, now they could be, if you want a second guitar, definitely get an Affinity. To the point where it could be your main guitar. I would probably say almost definitely change the machine heads because they feel a little bit, not terrible, they just could be better. And then possibly the pickups. The pickups don't sound bad. In fact, on the Bullet, they sounded really good, but the neck on this, it doesn't sound bad at all. I did a whole set on it the other night. It sounded fantastic. But compared to the Fender, the neck pickup is a bit lacking. Oddly, the bridge isn't as different. I think the bridge sounds better than the neck, so you could just replace the neck pickup. And I wouldn't spend a fortune. You don't need to spend a fortune on pickups. Let me tell you the output difference of these, because these are considerably lower output than these. And you can see it. If you look at the wines on the edge of this bobbin, there's about 2 wines of copper on that bridge pickup. But on this, the wines aren't to the edge, but there's a lot more wines of copper. Now the copper is what costs the money, and a magnet doesn't. So what you tend to get with cheaper guitars is about 2 wines of copper and a massive magnet, so it has a higher output to compensate, but it can sound a bit poo. These don't sound too bad, but they could sound a little bit better. I wouldn't get too upset about it. If it's your backup guitar, I wouldn't bother. If this is going to be your main guitar, try a couple of different sets of pickup. Buy some used ones. Right, the outputs. The Fender neck pickup is about 8K and the Fender bridge pickup is 10K. The Squier neck is 4.88K and the bridge, weirdly, is lower at 3.6K. And I thought that was a bit strange because almost always on every guitar, well in fact on every guitar I've got and have ever owned, because I always do a ohms test. Don't know where my pickup thing is, there, where my multimeter is. I thought it was weird that the rear pickup has a lower output than the front, but going between them, in fact, where's my lead? It doesn't sound quieter. Now it's hard to tell because that was really inconsistent, and also you've got to take into account the neck pickup has a lot more low end and the bridge doesn't, so we're talking about volume really, not body of sound, because there's going to be more body on the neck pickup and more twanginess on the bridge. But it doesn't sound like the bridge is quieter to me, but it is. Pots wise, the only problem I found with some guitars, that are not just cheap guitars actually, in fact all Chapman guitars weirdly, the tone, I haven't done this tone test yet, the tone pot on that, perfect. You turn it, well, less is less, more is more. But sometimes what you find is between about 7 and 10, nothing happens. And between like 0 and 3, it's like an on-off switch. So okay, I'd say if anything, the tone pot isn't the kind of sweep I like. I like to put audio pots in both. I wouldn't bother changing, there'll probably be small pots. Again, I wouldn't get too upset about a cheap switch or cheap pots, because most people put it on full and never do anything else, or just use this to turn the guitar off. I turn everything up and down all the time. That's just how I play Fender style guitars, so I'm more likely to wear a pot out than most people. However, I don't think I've ever worn a pot out. I've snapped a couple, I've accidentally knocked it on the desk in the studio and just smashed the pot off, but I don't think I've ever broken one. I've bought guitars which have been broken, but people mistreat guitars. Would I change the electrics? No, not unless something went wrong. I'm going to, which may sound hypocritical, but it's because I'm changing this into an Squier, so currently it's got 2 pickups, and if I change the wiring for 1 pickup, well, half the electrics are pointless, so I've got a wiring loom there ready to go in. That's why I'm changing the electrics. For anyone else, I would say you could use this stock. If this is your backup guitar, get a setup, do nothing, or set it up yourself. The truss rods are generally okay on them, and quite often with Telecasters, I've seen this quite a lot and had comments on my channel before. Sometimes the neck isn't aligned properly. This one is properly aligned, and with a Strat you can loosen the bolts, or just, if I'm being honest, I don't always do that, I just push it across and you can realign it. But a Tele has a squarer neck pocket, so you can't always push it over. And I've had it before where there's 2 options. You can either reroute the neck cavity and have it realigned, or move the bridge over. I go for the bridge option because I think it's less obvious. On this one it's perfect. On my Fender Player it's perfect. On my Squier Bullet it was off. My friend's got a Jim Root Telecaster, the Squier one. He took that to guitar to get the neck realigned. They redid the neck pocket. So it does happen, and sort of, I'm going to say most Teles. I don't know if it happens on the American ones as much, but I'm aware that it can happen on the Players, and it's far more common on, I've seen it on Bullets quite a lot, not on, well, I've only had one Affinity and it's been fine, so Affinity wise 100% fine. This is a great guitar. I'm really glad I bought it. It's got a full thickness body, which I believe they started doing this year. I've measured them. This body's actually thicker than the Fender, but it could be the lacquer because there's about 4 miles of lacquer on this. Not a bad thing. It looks cool, it's nice and shiny. But I don't like the thinner bodies like you get on the Bullets. Whereas this Affinity's got a full thickness body, so it feels like a Fender. If you check out the Blindfold video, I think the only difference he could really tell was the neck. Sound-wise, he couldn't. So, I don't know, you decide. 180 quid, 550 quid, that's quite a difference in price. I don't regret buying that at all, the Fender. Equally, I don't regret buying this. They're so similar. Guitars now come off a CNC machine in different countries, so a computer cuts it out. So it's mainly in the setup, and you can get a setup done at your local music shop for 60 quid. So, and they're Fenders. You can take this Lego. You can take the neck off. You can replace tuners. You can replace the nut, the bridge, the pickups, all the electrics. You can do. Wait till you see what I do to this. I'm going to muller it, but it's going to be wicked. And then I'll do a comparison on this and that and say, is it worth spending basically 500 quid on a standard Fender or 500 quid on a heavily modded Squier? I really think it's worth it because I want to try something. But you can do that. And on a £180 guitar, which is a proper full fat guitar, one you won't do all the mods on and think, oh, I wish I'd done that on a better guitar to begin with. You won't regret it on an Affinity, which is why I bought an Affinity. Also, the Affinity Stratocasters are very good. Not like when I was a kid, when they were a bit firewoody. Thank you for watching. Hopefully that was helpful. Please check out the other videos. I'll put links in the description. Boxes at the end. We've got blindfold comparisons. You'll see all the mod videos on this. How I do all the carves on the body. So that'll be fun to watch. I'll do all the wiring diagrams for the Squier mods. Loads of stuff. Thanks for watching.